The blood on Marcus Thorne's hands had long since washed away, but some mornings he still scrubbed his palms raw at the creek behind his cabin, watching the clear water run over his scarred knuckles, as though it might finally absolve him of 10 years spent killing at the edge of civilization. He had built this life deliberately small, deliberately isolated, carving out a homestead in the wild borderlands where the frontier met untamed forest, where neighbors were a day's ride apart, and the only voices he heard were the wind through pine trees and the occasional howl of wolves in the distance. Marcus had grown comfortable with silence, had made peace with solitude, had convinced himself that a man who had done what he had done in service of the kingdom's expansion deserved nothing more than this quiet penance among the trees. On the morning everything changed, Marcus was splitting firewood behind his cabin when he heard the sound that did not belong. Laughter, crude and sharp, echoing through the forest from the direction of the old logging road. Then screaming. Not the animal kind, but unmistakably the sound of someone in terror and pain. His body moved before his mind caught up, old instincts flooding back as he grabbed the axe and started running toward the commotion, his heart hammering against ribs that had forgotten what it felt like to care whether someone lived or died. He found them in a clearing where the logging road widened, a scene that made his blood turn to ice despite the summer heat. A wagon sat at an angle, one wheel broken, and surrounding it were 6 mercenaries in mismatched armor, their weapons drawn and their attention focused on the cage built into the wagon bed. Inside that cage were 5 orc women, shackled at the wrists and ankles, their green skin marked with bruises and cuts, their eyes wide with a mixture of defiance and desperation. One of the mercenaries was jabbing a spear through the bars, laughing as the women pressed themselves against the far side of the cage, and another was examining the broken wheel with obvious frustration. Marcus knew these men by type if not by face. Slavers, probably, or bounty hunters who had decided their captives were worth more sold than returned to whatever orc clan had offered a reward. The war between humans and orcs had officially ended 5 years ago, but men like these still treated orcs as less than human, as cargo to be bought and sold, as creatures whose suffering was entertainment. "Wheel's done," one of the mercenaries said, a tall man with a scar across his nose. "We are going to have to transfer them and come back for the wagon. Or we could have some fun first," another suggested, the one with the spear. "No one is going to care what condition they are in when we sell them." Marcus felt something cold and familiar settle into his chest, the same feeling he used to get before battle, when the world narrowed down to simple choices between action and inaction, between intervention and walking away. He had walked away from violence 3 years ago, had sworn he was done with blood and death, and the moral calculations of who deserved to live and who deserved to die. But as he watched one of the orc women meet his eyes through the bars, her small tusks bared in defiant fury, he realized that some choices were not really choices at all. He stepped into the clearing with the axe resting against his shoulder, his voice carrying the particular kind of calm that men who had seen real combat recognized immediately. That is far enough. 6 heads turned toward him. 6 hands moved toward weapons. The leader, the one with the scarred nose, looked Marcus up and down and apparently decided he was not particularly threatening. "A mistake. Walk away, farmer," the leader said. "This does not concern you. Those women are people," Marcus said quietly. "You are going to let them go." The mercenaries laughed. One of them, a younger man with a patchy beard, gestured at the cage with his sword. These are orcs, old man. Probably killed a dozen humans each. We are doing the world a favor getting them off the frontier." Marcus had heard that logic before, had used it himself once upon a time to justify things he could barely stand to remember. You have 3 seconds to start unlocking those shackles. The laughter stopped. The leader's hand dropped to his sword hilt. There are 6 of us and 1 of you. Do the arithmetic. I have, Marcus said, and then he moved. The first mercenary went down before he cleared his sword from its scabbard, the flat of Marcus's axe catching him across the temple hard enough to drop him like a stone. Marcus spun, using the momentum to bring the axe around in a low sweep that took the legs out from under the man with the spear. The third lunged at him with a knife, and Marcus caught his wrist, twisted, and sent him stumbling into the fourth. The leader finally got his sword free, and came at Marcus with an overhead strike that would have split him from crown to sternum if it had connected. But Marcus sidestepped and brought the axe handle up into the man's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. The fight was over in less than a minute. It would have been faster, but Marcus was deliberately pulling his strikes, using the flat of the axe and his fists instead of the blade, knocking the mercenaries unconscious rather than killing them. He was done with killing. He had promised himself that, and he meant it, even when rage and muscle memory screamed at him to finish what he had started. When the last mercenary hit the ground, Marcus stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard, blood running from a cut above his eyebrow, where one of them had gotten lucky with a glancing blow. The forest was silent except for the groaning of the unconscious men and the harsh sound of his own breathing. Slowly, Marcus turned toward the cage. 5 pairs of eyes stared at him, amber and gold and bright green, filled with an emotion he could not quite read. Fear, maybe, or disbelief, or some combination of the two. The tallest of the orc women, her dark hair braided back from her face, stood at the front of the cage with her shackled hands wrapped around the bars. "You are human," she said slowly, as though trying to make sense of a contradiction. "I am," Marcus agreed. He bent down and started searching the unconscious leader for keys. "And you are prisoners who should not be." He found the keys on the 3rd try, a ring of iron hanging from the leader's belt. Marcus approached the cage slowly, holding the keys up so they could see he meant to use them, then unlocked the cage door with fingers that trembled slightly from adrenaline crash. The door swung open with a rusty creak. The tall orc woman stepped out first, moving cautiously as though expecting a trap. Marcus held out the keys. "For the shackles, I am not going to hurt you." She took the keys without looking away from his face, her expression hard and searching. "Why did you help us?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Marcus said simply. He gestured back toward the unconscious mercenaries. "You should go. They will wake up eventually, and when they do, you want to be far from here." The tall woman turned and began unlocking the shackles of the others, starting with a younger orc woman whose face was swollen from a recent beating. As each woman was freed, she stepped out of the cage, rubbing at the raw marks the iron had left on her wrists, looking at Marcus with the same wary confusion. When the last shackle fell away, the tall woman handed the keys back to Marcus. "What is your name, human?" "Marcus Thorne." "I am Kara," she said. "These are my sisters, Greta, Nessa, Asha, and Lyra." She indicated each in turn. Greta was the younger one with the swollen face, built solid and strong despite her injuries. Nessa was lean and tall, with a network of scars across her arms that spoke of hard survival. Asha was shorter, rounder, with gentle eyes that seemed at odds with her tusks. Lyra was the smallest, barely more than a girl, with braids wound through with small bones and feathers. "We owe you a debt," Kara said formally. "By orc custom, that means we owe you service or blood price." Marcus shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. Just get to safety." "We have no home to return to," Kara said, and there was something broken in her voice despite her proud stance. "Our clan was destroyed. We were traveling to find sanctuary with the mountain tribes when these men ambushed us. We have no food, no supplies, no weapons. You saved our lives, Marcus Thorne, but we have nowhere to go." Marcus looked at the 5 women, at their bruised faces and torn clothes, at the way they stood together as though ready to defend each other against the next threat, and he felt something crack inside the careful isolation he had built around himself. He thought about sending them away, about maintaining the solitude that had been his shield for 3 years. He thought about the practical problems, the danger of harboring orc refugees, the way his neighbors would react if they found out. Then he thought about the way the mercenary had jabbed his spear through the bars for entertainment, and he thought about the fact that he had more than enough room in his cabin and his stores, and he thought about all the things he had done in the war that he could never take back. "My homestead is an hour's walk west," he heard himself say. "You can stay there until you figure out where to go next." Kara stared at him as though he had suggested something impossible. "You would shelter us. 5 orcs, 5 people who need help," Marcus corrected. "But we need to move now before these bastards wake up." He glanced at the unconscious mercenaries, then made a decision and started collecting their weapons, tossing swords and daggers into a pile. "Take these. If they come after you, you will need to defend yourselves." The women moved quickly, each taking a weapon with the ease of long familiarity. Marcus noticed that they handled the blades like warriors, not victims, and he revised his earlier assessment. These were not helpless refugees. These were survivors of something terrible, fighters who had been caught off guard and overwhelmed, but who knew exactly how to use the tools of violence. They left the clearing at a fast walk that became a jog, Marcus leading them through the forest on game trails that would be harder to follow than the logging road. No one spoke during the journey, everyone saving their breath for speed and distance. Marcus kept glancing back to make sure all 5 women were keeping pace, and each time he did, he found them moving through the forest with a grace that made his own progress seem clumsy by comparison. They were at home in the wilderness in a way he had never quite managed, their feet finding purchase on roots and rocks that he had to watch carefully to avoid. By the time his cabin came into view through the trees, the sun was high and hot, and Marcus's shirt was soaked with sweat. The homestead was modest, just a 2-room cabin with a stone chimney, a small barn for the 2 goats and handful of chickens he kept, and a garden plot that was currently yielding a respectable crop of vegetables. He had built it all himself over 3 years, cutting logs and stacking stones and hammering shingles until his hands bled, and it had been enough for one man living alone with his ghosts. Now, looking at it through the eyes of 5 exhausted orc women, he saw how small it was, how inadequate for the situation he had just created. "It is not much," he said, "but it is safe." Kara stepped forward, looking at the cabin and the cleared land around it. "You built this yourself?" "Yes." "Then it is more than we had an hour ago," she said quietly. She turned to face him fully, and in the clear light of day, Marcus could see the full extent of her injuries. A deep bruise covered one side of her jaw. Her knuckles were split and raw. There was a cut across her collarbone that had bled through her shirt. "We accept your hospitality, Marcus Thorne, and we will earn our keep while we stay." "You are injured," Marcus said. "All of you. First thing is to get you cleaned up and those wounds treated." He led them inside, into the main room of the cabin that served as kitchen, dining area, and workspace. The second room was his bedroom, barely large enough for the narrow bed and chest where he kept his few possessions. Looking at the space now, Marcus realized he had not thought this through at all. Where exactly were 5 women going to sleep? "There is a creek out back for washing," he said, pushing that problem aside for later. "I will get some clean cloth for bandages, and I have a salve that is good for cuts and bruises." The women explored the cabin with careful curiosity while Marcus gathered supplies. He could feel them watching him, assessing whether he was really safe or whether this was just another kind of trap. He did not blame them for the suspicion. They had every reason not to trust humans, especially human men, especially after what they had just been through. When they returned from the creek, their faces and arms scrubbed clean, the full extent of the damage became clear. Greta's eye was swollen nearly shut. Nessa had a burn on her forearm that looked like someone had held a torch too close to her skin. Asha had a split lip and bruised ribs. Lyra's wrists were raw and bleeding from the shackles, worse than the others because she had clearly fought them the hardest. Marcus worked methodically, cleaning wounds and applying salve, wrapping bandages around the worst of the injuries. The women bore his ministrations in stoic silence, though he saw Greta wince when he touched the swelling around her eye, and Lyra drew in a sharp breath when he cleaned the raw skin on her wrists. "You have done this before," Kara observed, watching him work. "You were a soldier." It was not a question, but Marcus answered anyway. "For 10 years. On the frontier during the expansion wars." Understanding flickered in her eyes, and with it, a new wariness. "You fought against my people." "I did." Marcus did not look away from her gaze. "I am not proud of everything I did in that uniform. It is part of why I live out here alone now." "And yet you saved us," Kara said slowly. "Why?" Marcus tied off the bandage on Lyra's wrist before answering. "Because the war is over, and I am trying to be someone different than who I was." "Because you deserved help, and I was there to give it." He met Kara's eyes. "Because it was right." The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid, with history and hurt, and the complicated weight of violence done and violence survived. Finally, Kara nodded once, a gesture that seemed to carry some kind of acceptance or at least a willingness to believe him for now. "We will need to set up sleeping arrangements," Marcus said, breaking the tension. "The bedroom is small, but you 5 can take it. I will sleep out here by the fire." "That is your bed," Kara protested. "We cannot take it." "You can and you will," Marcus said firmly. "You are guests and you are hurt, and I am not going to have you sleeping on the floor when there is a perfectly good bed available." They argued about it for a while, but Marcus was stubborn, and ultimately they were too exhausted to fight very hard. As the sun began to set, the 5 women crowded into the small bedroom, and Marcus heard them talking quietly in their own language, the sounds of which were surprisingly musical, all rolling consonants and sharp vowel sounds that rose and fell like song. He lay down on the floor by the fireplace, using his pack as a pillow and a spare blanket for covering, and stared at the ceiling beams he had cut and shaped with his own hands. His mind was racing, running through everything that had happened, everything that could go wrong. The mercenaries would wake up eventually. They might come looking for their lost cargo. Marcus's neighbors, the few that existed out here, might notice the orc women and ask questions or worse. And underneath all the practical concerns was the strange, disorienting feeling of not being alone anymore, of having other people in his space after 3 years of isolation. He should have been regretting his impulsive decision. Instead, as he drifted off to sleep to the sound of quiet breathing from the other room, Marcus felt something that might have been the beginning of purpose. Morning came with the smell of cooking. Marcus woke disoriented, not sure what had pulled him from sleep, and then realized that someone was at his stove and something was sizzling in his pan. He sat up fast, reaching for the knife he kept nearby, and found Kara standing at the stove, cooking eggs from his chickens and what looked like wild mushrooms she must have foraged from the forest. You were asleep, she said without turning around. We were hungry. I hope you do not mind. Marcus relaxed, setting the knife aside and running a hand through his hair. No, it is fine. You did not have to cook. We owe you hospitality debt, Kara said, turning to face him with a wooden spatula in hand. In my culture, that means we repay your generosity with service until the debt is balanced. You will find that we are not comfortable being charity cases. Marcus Thorne. The other women emerged from the bedroom as breakfast finished cooking, looking slightly better than they had the night before, though the bruises were if anything more colorful in the morning light. They ate together at Marcus's small table, which was crowded with 6 people but not impossibly so, and the food was better than anything Marcus had cooked for himself in months. Where did you find the mushrooms? He asked Kara. There is a dead oak about 50 paces into the forest behind your cabin, she said. It had a good crop of edibles growing on the north side. Also, your garden has beetles eating the squash leaves. I can make a mixture that will keep them away if you have vinegar and soap. I do, Marcus said. But you do not have to work. You should rest and heal. We are not good at resting, Nessa said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was lower than Kara's, rough as though from disuse or damage. We need to feel useful, or we will go mad thinking about what happened. Marcus understood that impulse, had felt it himself after he left the military and needed to work himself to exhaustion every day just to keep the memories at bay. All right, he said, but nothing too strenuous. You are all still recovering. They split up after breakfast, each finding some task to occupy themselves. Kara made the beetle mixture for the garden and showed Marcus how to apply it to the leaves. Greta, despite her swollen eye, proved to be skilled with animals and spent time with the goats, grooming them and checking their hooves. Nessa sharpened every blade in the house until they could split hairs, her hands moving with practiced precision. Asha organized the chaotic mess that was Marcus's pantry, arranging everything with meticulous care. Lyra, the youngest, seemed drawn to the forest and kept disappearing into the trees, returning with useful plants or interesting bits of wood that she carved into small figures with a knife. Marcus watched them work and felt his carefully isolated life being systematically invaded, and the strangest part was that he did not mind. They moved through his space with respect and purpose, asking before they used his tools, showing him what they were doing and why. It was not the intrusion he had feared. It was something more like collaboration, like his solitude was being reshaped into something that might be community. 3 days passed in this way, settling into a routine that felt both strange and natural. Marcus worked on repairs to the barn while the women tackled various projects around the homestead. And in the evenings, they ate together and talked in halting conversation as they learned each other's stories. He learned that Kara was the eldest sister, that she had been training to be a war leader before her clan was destroyed by a coalition of human militias who did not care that the war was officially over. He learned that Greta had been a blacksmith's apprentice, that Nessa had survived on her own for 2 years after losing her family, that Asha had been a healer and knew more about medicinal plants than anyone Marcus had ever met. Lyra, the youngest, had lost her parents when she was 13 and had been raised by her older sisters, and she had a gift for languages that let her pick up human speech faster than the others. They learned that Marcus had grown up in the southern provinces, that he had joined the military at 17 because he was good at fighting, and it seemed like the only option, that he had spent 10 years doing things he deeply regretted in service of an expansion that had cost thousands of lives on both sides. They learned that he had walked away from his commission 3 years ago, that he had come to the frontier specifically because he wanted to be away from people and towns, and anything that reminded him of the war, that he had been alone ever since because he believed that was what he deserved. "That is a sad way to live," Ashas said one evening as they sat around the fire. "Punishing yourself forever for things you did when you were young and following orders." "Some things should not be forgiven," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe not," Kara agreed. "But you saved 5 lives 3 days ago. That has to count for something." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and the conversation moved on to other things. On the 4th day, everything changed again. Marcus was in the garden, pulling weeds from around the bean plants when Lyra came running from the forest with her eyes wide. "Riders," she said breathlessly. "Coming down the logging road. 6 of them, and they look angry. The mercenaries, of course." Marcus had known they would come eventually, had been preparing for it even as he hoped they would just cut their losses and move on. "Get everyone inside," he said, standing up and brushing dirt from his hands. "Stay away from the windows." Kara emerged from the cabin as Lyra ran past. "What is happening?" "The men from the forest," Marcus said. "They found us." "Then we fight," Kara said immediately, and Nessa appeared beside her with 2 swords in hand. "No," Marcus said firmly. "This is my problem. Get inside." "They came for us," Kara argued. "That makes it our problem." "And you are in no condition to fight," Marcus countered, gesturing at the still visible bruises on her face. "Besides, if they see you, it confirms that you are here. If it is just me, I can deny everything." The sound of hoofbeats was getting closer. Kara looked like she wanted to argue more, but Nessa grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the cabin. "He is right. Come on." Marcus waited in the yard as the 6 riders came into view. They were the same mercenaries, now bruised and furious, and they reined in their horses in a loose semicircle around him. The leader with the scarred nose dismounted, his hand on his sword hilt. "Where are they?" he demanded without preamble. "Where are who?" Marcus asked mildly. "Do not play games with me, old man. 5 orc women. You took them from us and we want them back." "I do not know what you are talking about," Marcus said. "I live alone out here. Nobody comes through except occasionally a trapper or hunter." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You are lying." "We tracked them this way. And someone told us about the crazy hermit who lives by himself in these woods. That would be you." "Feel free to search the area," Marcus said, knowing they would find nothing. The women were inside the cabin, and from the outside, there was no evidence of anyone but him living there. "You will find I am telling the truth." 2 of the mercenaries dismounted and started searching, checking the barn and walking around the cabin, peering in windows. Marcus stood very still, his heart pounding, hoping that the women had the sense to stay hidden and quiet. After several minutes, the searchers returned to the leader and shook their heads. "Nothing," one said. "Just his stuff." The leader stared at Marcus with open suspicion. "We will be watching this place," he said. "If we find out you are hiding them, you will regret it." "I am not hiding anyone," Marcus said. "Now get off my land." The mercenaries remounted, but they took their time about it, making it clear that they were not intimidated. As they rode away, the leader looked back over his shoulder with an expression that promised this was not over. Marcus waited until they were out of sight, then waited another 5 minutes, then finally walked back to the cabin. The women emerged from where they had been hiding in the small root cellar beneath the floorboards, dusty and pale. "They will be back," Kara said. "I know," Marcus agreed, "which means we need to figure out a plan." They gathered around the table, and Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had thought saving them would be the hard part, but that had just been the beginning. Now he had to figure out how to keep them safe in a world that saw them as less than human, as property to be bought and sold. "You could move on," he said carefully. "Head for the mountain tribes. I can give you supplies, weapons, enough to make the journey. Kara shook her head. We talked about that already. The mountain tribes are 3 weeks away on foot, through territory full of human settlements. 5 orc women traveling alone would be captured again or killed before we made it halfway. Then what do you want to do? Marcus asked. Stay here, Kara said simply. You have a defensible position and you know how to fight. We can help defend the homestead. Together we are stronger than any of us would be alone. You cannot stay here forever, Marcus pointed out. Why not? Greta asked. You live here alone. Why could we not live here together? Marcus opened his mouth to explain all the reasons why that was impossible, why society would not accept it, why his neighbors would eventually notice and cause problems, why 6 people living in a 2-room cabin was not sustainable long-term. But looking at their faces, at the hope and desperation mixed together, he could not bring himself to say any of it. We will make it work, he said instead. But that means we need to expand the cabin, add more space, and we need to be careful. No going into town, no being seen by travelers. If anyone asks, I still live alone. We can do that, Kara said. We are good at being invisible when we need to be. The next weeks fell into a new pattern, one that required more planning and coordination. During the day, they worked on expanding the cabin, adding a second sleeping room and a larger common area. Marcus and the women cut logs from the forest, stripped bark, notched ends, and raised walls with a speed that surprised him. The women worked with tireless energy, and Greta's experience with blacksmithing meant she could repair and maintain tools better than Marcus ever could. At night, they took turns keeping watch, just in case the mercenaries returned. They never did, but the vigilance became habit, and Marcus found himself appreciating the extra eyes and ears. Lyra was particularly good at sentry duty, her young eyes sharp in the darkness and her ears able to pick up sounds that Marcus missed entirely. As summer faded into autumn, the harvest came in strong. The garden yielded more vegetables than Marcus had ever grown before, thanks to Kara's knowledge of companion planting and natural pest control. The forest provided wild nuts and mushrooms, and game that Nessa hunted with a bow they had made together from ash wood. The chickens laid more eggs than Marcus could remember them producing, possibly because Greta sang to them in Orcish while collecting eggs each morning, a ritual that seemed to keep them calm and productive. Slowly, without Marcus quite noticing when it happened, the homestead stopped being his solitary refuge and became something different. It became a home, one filled with voices and laughter and the constant small negotiations of people living together. The women argued sometimes, sharp disagreements in Orcish that Marcus could not follow, but they always resolved their conflicts and moved on. They teased each other and told stories, and created a sense of family that Marcus had not experienced since he was a child in his parents' house. And slowly, even more gradually, Marcus realized he was starting to care about them not as refugees he was helping, but as individuals he knew and liked. He appreciated Kara's steady leadership and the way she made decisions that balanced everyone's needs. He enjoyed Greta's boisterous humor and her terrible singing voice that she deployed anyway with complete confidence. He respected Nessa's quiet competence and the way she could fix almost anything with enough time and the right tools. He valued Ashaz's gentle wisdom and her ability to diffuse tensions before they escalated. And he was charmed by Lyra's curiosity and the endless questions she asked about everything from human customs to why the sky changed colors at sunset. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow in November that blanketed the homestead and forest in white. They were prepared, with food stores and firewood stacked high, but the cold and darkness brought everyone closer together literally and figuratively. The expanded cabin stayed warm with the fire burning constantly, and the evenings grew longer as they had less outside work to do. It was during one of those long winter evenings, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, that Kara asked the question that had been hanging unspoken between them for months. "What happens when spring comes?" she said quietly. "Do we stay, or do we try to reach the mountain tribes?" Marcus looked up from the knife he was sharpening. The other women had gone quiet, waiting for his answer, and he realized they were all wondering the same thing. "That depends," he said carefully. "Do you want to stay?" "We are safe here," Kara said. "We are fed and sheltered and useful. But this is your home, Marcus. We cannot stay forever if you do not want us here." Marcus set down the knife and looked around the room at the 5 women who had become such a central part of his life that he could barely remember what the silence had felt like before they arrived. "I want you to stay," he heard himself say. "If you want to stay, then you are welcome here for as long as you need." "Not need," Kara corrected. Do you want us here, Marcus?" It was the most direct question anyone had asked him in years, and it deserved an honest answer. "Yes," he said simply. "I want you here, all of you. This place was just a house when I lived here alone. You have made it a home." Something changed in the room after that conversation, a shift in the fundamental understanding of what they were building together. They were not temporary refugees and reluctant hosts anymore. They were people choosing to make a life together, and that choice carried weight and responsibility, and a kind of commitment that Marcus had not expected to feel again. As winter deepened, Marcus found himself paying more attention to Kara specifically, noticing things he had been deliberately not noticing before. The way she moved with unconscious grace, even when just performing mundane tasks. The sound of her laugh, which was rare but genuine when it came. The focused intensity she brought to everything she did, whether leading strategy discussions or simply mending clothes by firelight. The strength in her hands and the kindness in her eyes and the small tusks that showed when she smiled. He told himself he was being ridiculous. She was orc, and he was human, and that alone was enough to make any romantic interest impossible. Add in the power imbalance of the situation, the fact that she was dependent on his hospitality, the history of violence between their peoples, and it became not just impossible but wrong to even think about. So Marcus tried very hard not to think about it, and failed completely. He did not know that Kara was having similar thoughts, struggling with her own complicated feelings about the scarred veteran who had risked everything to save 5 strangers, and then given them not just shelter but belonging. She noticed the way Marcus's hands were always gentle when treating injuries, despite their obvious capacity for violence. She appreciated his quiet humor and the way he listened more than he talked. She saw how hard he worked to make sure everyone had what they needed, even at cost to himself. And she was increasingly aware of the way her heart beat faster when he was near, the way she looked for excuses to work alongside him, the way his rare smiles made her feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. But Kara knew the realities of their situation as well as Marcus did, knew that human-orc relationships were taboo, that they would face violence and rejection from both their peoples if they tried. So she kept her feelings private, and focused on being useful and earning her keep, and pretending that living in close quarters with Marcus Thorne was not slowly breaking down every wall she had built around her heart. The tension between them might have stayed unspoken indefinitely if not for the wolves. They came in late January, driven by hunger and cold to venture closer to human habitation than they normally would. Marcus heard the chickens making panicked sounds in the middle of the night and grabbed his axe, running outside in his shirt sleeves despite the bitter cold. He found 3 wolves circling the chicken coop, their breath steaming in the freezing air, their eyes reflecting the moonlight with eerie brightness. Marcus yelled and charged, and the wolves scattered initially, but they were desperate enough to regroup for another attempt. He managed to drive them back toward the tree line, swinging the axe and making himself as large and loud as possible. But one of the wolves circled behind him and lunged at his unprotected back. It never reached him. Kara appeared seemingly out of nowhere, wearing only her sleeping clothes and wielding a sword, and she intercepted the wolf mid-leap with a strike that would have killed it if Marcus had not yelled, "Do not kill them." Kara adjusted her swing at the last instant, hitting the wolf with the flat of the blade instead of the edge, sending it tumbling away with a yelp of pain. The other wolves, seeing 2 defenders now instead of 1, decided discretion was the better part of valor and melted back into the forest. Marcus stood breathing hard, his heart hammering from adrenaline, and turned to Kara. "Thank you. You are bleeding," she said, pointing at his side. He looked down and saw that one of the wolves had gotten close enough to rake claws across his ribs, leaving 4 parallel cuts that were seeping blood into his shirt. "It is not deep," he said, though it hurt more than he wanted to admit. "Inside," Kara ordered. "Now." They went back into the cabin, where the other women were now awake and clustering around with concern. Kara made Marcus sit by the fire while she fetched water and bandages, her movements efficient and professional. She pulled up his shirt to examine the wound, her fingers cool against his skin, and Marcus tried very hard to think about anything other than how close she was standing, how her hair had come loose from its braid and was falling around her face, how her amber eyes caught the firelight. "This will hurt," she said, and then she cleaned the wound with water and salve that stung badly enough to make him hiss. "Sorry," she murmured, and her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "It is fine," Marcus managed. "I have had worse." "I know," Kara said. "I have seen your scars." She bound the wound with strips of clean cloth, wrapping them around his ribs with practiced ease. Her hands lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary when she tied off the bandage, and when Marcus looked up, he found her watching him with an expression he could not quite interpret. "You should have woken me," she said. "We could have handled the wolves together from the start." "I did not want to put you in danger," Marcus said. "We are warriors," Kara said, and there was frustration in her voice now. "We can protect ourselves and you." "You do not have to face every threat alone, Marcus." "I know that," he said. "Do you?" Kara challenged. "Because you still act like you have to carry everything yourself, like you cannot trust anyone else to help." "That is not it," Marcus protested. "I just do not want anything to happen to you." "Any of you," he added quickly, but not quickly enough. Kara went very still. "Why not?" she asked quietly. Marcus realized he had just walked into territory he had been carefully avoiding for months. "Because I care about you," he said, the words coming out more honestly than he intended. "Because you have become important to me. All of you," he added again, but they both knew he was not talking about all of them. "Marcus," Kara said, and his name in her mouth sounded like something precious and fragile. "You know we cannot." "I know," he said quickly. "I know all the reasons this is impossible. You do not need to explain them to me." "Then why say anything?" Kara asked, and she sounded almost angry now, or maybe hurt. "Because you asked," Marcus said simply. "And I am tired of lying." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they could not say and could not have. Finally, Kara stood up and stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. "You should rest," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Those wounds need time to heal." She walked away before Marcus could respond. disappearing into the sleeping room and closing the door with a firmness that was not quite a slam but carried the same message. Marcus sat by the fire alone, his ribs aching and his heart feeling bruised, and wondered if he had just ruined everything. The next days were awkward in a way they had not been since the women first arrived. Kara was professional and polite, but she avoided being alone with Marcus, and the easy camaraderie they had built over months felt suddenly strained. The other women noticed but did not comment, though Marcus caught Nessa giving him thoughtful looks and Asha watching Kara with concern. Marcus threw himself into work, taking on projects that were probably too ambitious for late winter, but that kept him busy and distracted. He started building a proper smokehouse for preserving meat, hauling stones from the creek for a foundation, cutting and shaping logs despite the cold. His ribs ached where the wolf had clawed him, but he ignored the pain and kept working until exhaustion forced him to stop. One evening, about a week after the wolf incident, he was working on the smokehouse after dark, too stubborn to quit despite the fact that he could barely see what he was doing. He did not hear Kara approach until she was standing right next to him. "You are going to hurt yourself working in the dark like this," she said. Marcus set down the hammer he had been using. "I am being careful." "You are being stupid," Kara corrected. "And you are avoiding coming inside because you do not want to see me." "That is not true," Marcus protested. "Then why have you been working until long after dark every night this week?" Kara challenged. "Why do you leave before dawn and come back after we have eaten dinner?" "Because being near you and not being able to touch you is torture," Marcus thought but did not say. "I have a lot to do before spring." "You are lying again," Kara said. She moved to stand directly in front of him, close enough that he could see her face clearly even in the moonlight. "Why did you have to say that you care about me?" "Because it is true," Marcus said. "It makes everything harder," Kara said, and there was real pain in her voice. "I was managing fine when I thought you were just being kind to refugees. But knowing that you care, that you see me as more than just an orc you saved, that changes things." "How?" Marcus asked. "Because I care about you too," Kara said, the words coming out in a rush as though she had been holding them back for too long. "And I have no idea what to do about it. You are human and I am orc, and the world will not accept us together. My sisters need me to be strong and focused, and I cannot be those things when I am thinking about you constantly. And most of all, I am terrified that this is just gratitude I am feeling, that I am confusing safety and kindness with something more, and that if I act on it, I will ruin the best thing that has happened to me in years." Marcus stared at her, his heart doing complicated things in his chest. "It is not gratitude," he said firmly. "I know what gratitude looks like, and this is not it. You are brilliant and strong and stubborn and kind, and I would care about you even if I had met you under completely different circumstances." "You do not know that," Kara argued. "I do," Marcus said. "Because I have spent 3 years avoiding caring about anyone, and you managed to get past every defense I had in a matter of months. That is not gratitude. That is you being someone extraordinary." Kara made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "What do we do, Marcus? Even if we both feel this way, what possible future do we have?" "I do not know," Marcus admitted. "But I know that I am tired of pretending I do not feel this way. I know that life is short and unpredictable, and we are both proof of that. And I know that I would rather have whatever time we can have together, even if it is complicated and difficult, than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." "That is a romantic sentiment," Kara said, "but it does not address the practical reality that we would be outcasts from both our peoples if anyone found out." "Then we do not tell anyone," Marcus said. "We stay here, we keep building this life we have started, and we figure out the rest as we go." "You make it sound simple," Kara said. "It is simple, Marcus argued. Not easy, but simple. Do you want to be with me? Because if you do, we will find a way to make it work. Kara looked at him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face as though looking for doubt or deception. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she stepped forward and kissed him, her lips warm despite the cold, her tusks pressing gently against his skin in a way that was strange and wonderful and completely right. Marcus kissed her back, his hands coming up to cup her face, and for a perfect moment, all the complications and impossibilities fell away. There was just this, two people who had found each other against all odds, choosing to be together despite everything that said they should not. When they finally broke apart, Kara rested her forehead against his. This is going to be complicated, she said. Probably, Marcus agreed. My sisters are going to have opinions, Kara warned. I expect so, Marcus said. And if anyone finds out, we will be in real danger, Kara continued. Then we will be careful, Marcus said. Together. Kara smiled, a real genuine smile that showed her small tusks and made her whole face light up. Together, she echoed. They went back to the cabin hand in hand, and when they walked through the door, 4 pairs of knowing eyes watched them with expressions ranging from amusement to satisfaction. Finally, Greta said. The tension was getting unbearable. You knew? Kara asked. Everyone knew, Nessa said dryly. You two have been dancing around each other for months. We were starting to think we would have to lock you in a room together. We are happy for you, Asha said sincerely. Both of you. Lyra just grinned. Does this mean Marcus is joining the family officially? Marcus looked at the 4 women who had become something like sisters to him over the past months. If you will have me. You saved our lives and gave us a home, Kara said. You are already family, Marcus. This just makes it official. The celebration that followed was low-key but genuine, with everyone staying up late talking and laughing, and Marcus felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He had come to the frontier to be alone, to punish himself for his past, to live out his days in quiet isolation. Instead, he had found a family, and now he had found love, and the life he was building was so much better than anything he had imagined for himself. Spring came slowly that year, the snow melting in fits and starts, but when it finally arrived, it brought new growth and new possibilities. Marcus and Kara were careful about their relationship in public, but in the safety of the homestead, they built something strong and real. The other women adapted to the new dynamic easily, teasing them gently, but accepting the relationship without judgment. As the weather warmed, they expanded their crops and made improvements to the homestead, building a proper barn and extending the garden. Trade caravans occasionally passed along the distant logging road, but the women stayed hidden during those times, and Marcus's reputation as a hermit kept people from investigating too closely. Late that spring, a trader stopped by the homestead, an old man who Marcus vaguely remembered from his first year in the area. The man was friendly but nosy, asking questions about how Marcus was managing alone, whether he ever got lonely, whether he had considered taking a wife. I am fine as I am, Marcus said firmly, exchanging supplies and encouraging the trader to move along. After the man left, Kara emerged from hiding with a thoughtful expression. He asked if you had considered taking a wife. He was just making conversation, Marcus said. But it is a good question, Kara said. Not about a wife, but about making this official somehow. We live together, we work together, we are building a life together. In orc culture, that would be considered a marriage already. But in human culture, you need ceremonies and papers and approval from others. I do not need anyone's approval, Marcus said. You are my partner, my love, my home. That is all that matters to me. Still, Kara said, it might be safer if people thought you had married someone human. It would explain why you have more supplies than a single man would need, why your homestead is expanding, and it would give us an excuse if anyone ever saw one of us by accident. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Marcus asked with a smile. "I am suggesting we consider making our commitment formal," Kara said, "even if we are the only ones who know the real nature of it." "I do not need a ceremony to tell me we are committed," Marcus said. "But if you want one, if it would make you feel more secure, then I will happily marry you in whatever way makes sense." They talked about it with the other women, and Ashas suggested a solution. "In old orc tradition," she said, "two people who wanted to marry would go before the clan elders and speak their vows under the open sky, witnessed by family and blessed by the spirits. We do not have elders here, but we have family, and the sky is still the sky." So on a clear evening in late spring, with the sun setting in brilliant colors over the forest, Marcus and Kara stood together in the meadow behind the homestead while Greta, Nessa, Asha, and Lyra bore witness. There were no legal documents, no human officials, no recognition from any government or church. But there were vows spoken from the heart, promises to stand together through whatever came, commitments to build a life and a future as partners in all things. "I promise to honor you and protect you and love you for as long as I live," Marcus said, holding both of Kara's hands in his. "You have given me a reason to hope again, to believe that I can be more than my past. You are my home and my heart. I promise to stand beside you and trust you and love you with everything I am," Kara said, her voice strong and clear. "You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. You are my shelter and my strength." Asha performed a simple blessing in Orcish, calling on ancestral spirits to watch over the new union. Greta, Nessa, and Lyra added their own blessings, speaking of hope and family, and the bonds that transcend blood and species. When it was done, Marcus and Kara kissed as the sun touched the horizon, and the small gathered family cheered and clapped. The celebration afterward was warm and full of laughter, with food and drink and stories told late into the night. Marcus looked around at the people who had become his family, at the woman who had become his wife in every way that mattered, and felt a sense of completeness he had never expected to experience. Summer passed in hard work and simple joy. The crops grew tall, the animals thrived, and the homestead prospered. Marcus and Kara settled into partnership that was both practical and passionate, balancing the mundane tasks of running a farm with the deeper work of building a marriage. They argued sometimes, usually about small things like the best way to stack firewood or whether it was too early to harvest the wheat, but they always found their way back to understanding and compromise. The other women thrived as well. Greta built a small forge behind the barn and started making tools and repairs that were better quality than anything available from traveling traders. Nessa became their chief hunter, keeping them supplied with meat and furs. Asha tended a medicinal garden and developed remedies that were remarkably effective. Lyra, the youngest, seemed to grow more confident and capable every day, taking on more responsibility and becoming an essential part of their small community. But peace, Marcus had learned in his years as a soldier, was always temporary. Trouble arrived in late summer in the form of a militia patrol. They came riding down the logging road in formation, 10 men in rough uniforms carrying official writs from the territorial governor. Marcus saw them coming from a distance and had time to warn the women, who disappeared into the forest with practiced ease, taking their weapons and supplies with them. By the time the militia reached the homestead, Marcus was alone in his yard, calmly chopping wood as though he had nothing to hide. The patrol leader, a hard-faced man named Captain Reeves, dismounted and approached with the kind of swagger that marked him as someone who enjoyed having authority. "Marcus Thorne?" he asked, though it was clear he already knew the answer. "That is me," Marcus confirmed, setting down his axe but staying close to it. "I am Captain Reeves of the Territorial Militia. We are conducting sweeps of the frontier looking for orc refugees and escaped prisoners. We have reports of suspicious activity in this area." "I have not seen any orcs," Marcus said calmly. "I live alone out here and I keep to myself." Reeves looked around at the expanded cabin, the improved barn, the large garden. "You have a lot for one man living alone." "I work hard," Marcus said. "And I have been here for years building this place up." "Mind if we search?" Reeves asked, though it was not really a question. Marcus wanted to refuse but knew that would only increase suspicion. "Go ahead. You will not find anything." The militia spent an hour searching the homestead, going through the cabin and barn, checking every corner and storage space. They found nothing that definitively indicated anyone but Marcus lived there, though one soldier commented on the fact that Marcus seemed to have an unusual number of sleeping furs and blankets. "Winter gets cold," Marcus said with a shrug. Captain Reeves was not entirely satisfied, but without concrete evidence, there was nothing he could do. Before he left, he gave Marcus a hard look. "We will be patrolling this area regularly. If you see any orcs, you are required by territorial law to report them immediately." "Understood," Marcus said. After the militia rode away, Marcus waited a full hour before signaling the all clear. The women emerged from the forest, pale and shaken. "That was too close," Nessa said. "They will be back," Kara added. "They suspect something even if they could not prove it." "Then we need to be more careful," Marcus said. "No one goes out in daylight when we know patrols are scheduled. We set up better hiding places inside the homestead, and we prepare for the possibility that someday we will have to run." They spent the following weeks creating contingency plans and preparing for the worst. Marcus built a concealed root cellar beneath the barn that could hide 5 people comfortably. They packed emergency supplies and cached them at locations in the forest. They established signals and escape routes. It was exhausting and frightening, but it was necessary. The militia returned 3 more times over the following months, always unannounced, always searching, always asking questions. Each time, Marcus maintained his story, and each time, the women successfully hid. But the stress was taking its toll, especially on Lyra, who was the youngest and most frightened by the near-constant threat. "We cannot live like this forever," Kara said one night after another militia visit. "Always hiding, always afraid. This is not a life. What other choice do we have?" Marcus asked. "Going to the mountain tribes is still dangerous, maybe more so now that the militia is actively patrolling." "There might be another option," Asha said slowly. She had been quiet during most of the discussion, but now she spoke up with careful deliberation. "There are stories of a settlement to the far north, beyond the frontier, where humans and orcs live together in peace. A place founded by refugees and deserters from both sides of the war. It might just be a myth, but if it is real, we might be able to find safety there." "How far north?" Marcus asked. 2 months of travel at least," Asha said, "through unmapped wilderness. We would need supplies and luck, and there is no guarantee the settlement even exists." "But if it does," Kara said, her eyes lighting up with hope, "we could live openly. We would not have to hide. We could have a real future." Marcus looked around at the homestead he had built, the life he had created over years of hard work. Leaving would mean abandoning everything, walking away from the only place he had felt at home since the war. But looking at Kara's face, at the hope and desperation there, he realized the choice was not really a choice at all. "Then we go north," he said. "We pack what we can carry. We cache what we cannot, and we leave before the next militia patrol. The preparation took 2 weeks of intense work. They packed food, clothing, weapons, tools, everything they could carry on their backs or in packs that the goats could bear. Marcus felt a strange grief as he looked around at the cabin, at the farm he had built with his own hands, knowing he might never see it again. But when he looked at Kara, at the woman he loved and had married under Orc tradition, the grief faded into determination. They left on a cool morning in early autumn, just as the leaves were beginning to turn. Marcus took one last look at the homestead, then turned his back on it and walked into the forest with his family. 6 people, 2 goats, and everything they owned in the world, heading north toward an uncertain future. The journey was harder than any of them expected. The wilderness beyond the frontier was dense and trackless, full of steep hills and tangled undergrowth. They had to navigate by the sun and stars, staying away from any settlements or roads, traveling through territory that maps labeled as unexplored. Food was a constant concern, even with Nessa's hunting skills and Ashaz's knowledge of edible plants. The weather turned cold as they traveled north, and they had to stop frequently to build shelters and wait out storms. But they were together, and that made the hardship bearable. Marcus walked beside Kara, and they took turns encouraging each other when one of them was struggling. Greta kept spirits up with terrible jokes and songs. Nessa scouted ahead and found the safest routes. Ashaz tended injuries and illnesses with her healing knowledge. Lyra proved to be surprisingly resilient, adapting to the hard travel with determination that surprised everyone. 6 weeks into the journey, they encountered their first real obstacle. A river, wide and fast with autumn melt, cutting directly across their path with no obvious way to cross. "We could go east and look for a ford," Nessa suggested. "That would add days to the journey," Kara said, "and we are already running low on supplies." Marcus studied the river, looking at the current and the banks. "We could build a raft. There is enough driftwood along the shore, and we have rope." It took them 2 days to construct something that would float and hold their supplies. The crossing was terrifying, with the current stronger than they had anticipated, and the cold water threatening to drag them under. But they made it to the far shore alive, if soaked and shivering, and pressed on. 7 weeks in, they started to wonder if the settlement was real or just a hopeful myth. The wilderness seemed endless, and they had seen no signs of civilization, orc or human, for over a week. Supplies were critically low, and everyone was exhausted from the constant travel. Then, on the morning of their 53rd day, Lyra climbed a tall hill to scout ahead and came running back with her eyes wide and her voice breathless. "Smoke! I can see smoke from cookfires. There is a settlement ahead." They approached cautiously, not sure what they would find. As they crested the hill that Lyra had climbed, they saw it. A village, perhaps 50 buildings, nestled in a valley beside a lake. And moving among those buildings were both humans and orcs, living and working side by side. The settlement was real. Against all odds, after nearly 2 months of desperate travel, they had found it. The welcome they received was cautious but warm. The settlement, they learned, was called Northhaven, and it had been founded 15 years earlier by refugees from the early years of the war. The mayor, a middle-aged orc woman named Elder Mara, listened to their story and offered them immediate assistance. "You are not the first to find us," she said, "and you will not be the last. Many people come north seeking a place where they can live without persecution. You are welcome here, but you must contribute to the community and abide by our laws." "We can do that," Marcus said. "We are farmers and builders. We can work." "And you are married?" Elder Mara asked, looking between Marcus and Kara. "A human and an orc," We are, Kara said, lifting her chin defiantly. Elder Mara smiled. Then you will fit in well here. We have several mixed couples in Northhaven. You will find it is not so unusual here as it is in the south. They were given a small cabin on the edge of the settlement and supplies to see them through the coming winter. The other residents of Northhaven were welcoming, offering help and advice, and within days, Marcus and his family began to feel like they were truly home. Over the following months, they integrated into the community. Marcus used his construction skills to help repair and improve buildings. Kara organized a hunting group that helped keep the settlement supplied with meat. Greta set up a forge and became the village blacksmith. Nessa joined the settlement's scouts, using her wilderness skills to map the surrounding territory. Asha became an assistant to the village healer, sharing her knowledge and learning new techniques. Lyra, the youngest, started attending the settlement school, learning to read and write and making friends her own age for the first time since her parents died. Spring came to Northhaven with warm winds and blooming flowers, and with it came a sense of permanence and possibility. Marcus and Kara's cabin became a gathering place for their sisters and friends, a home full of laughter and love, and the daily rhythms of life well lived. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset over the lake, Kara turned to Marcus with a serious expression. "I have something to tell you." Marcus felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," Kara said quietly. "We are going to have a child." Marcus stared at her, his mind trying to process what she had just said. A child. His child. Their child. A life that would be both human and orc, born into a world that was still figuring out how to accept such unions. "Are you sure?" he finally managed. "Asha confirmed it yesterday," Kara said. "I am about 2 months along. Marcus, I know this is complicated, but I want this. I want to have your child." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that he felt her heart beat against his chest. "It is not complicated," he said. "It is wonderful, scary and wonderful." "You are not upset?" Kara asked. "I am terrified," Marcus admitted. "But I am also the happiest I have ever been. We are going to be parents." They told the others that evening, and the celebration that followed was joyful and raucous. Greta immediately started planning a cradle she would build. Nessa promised to hunt extra meat to make sure Kara stayed healthy. Asha began preparing herbal supplements and discussing what Kara should expect during pregnancy. Lyra just threw her arms around both of them and cried happy tears. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Kara's belly grew, Marcus found himself feeling things he had never felt before. Wonder at the life growing inside the woman he loved. Protectiveness toward both mother and child. Fear that he would not be a good father, balanced by determination to be the best father he could be. Their daughter was born on a cool autumn morning, almost exactly 1 year after they had arrived in Northhaven. The birth was long and difficult, but Asha and the village healer guided Kara through it, and when Marcus finally heard the sharp cry of his newborn child, he felt his heart break and remake itself in an instant. She was perfect. Small and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, with green-tinged skin and tiny pointed ears and her mother's eyes. They named her Mara, after the elder who had welcomed them to Northhaven, and she became the center of their world. Watching Kara with their daughter, seeing the fierce love and tenderness in her eyes, Marcus felt the last pieces of his old guilt and isolation finally fall away. He had spent years believing he did not deserve happiness, that his past sins meant he should live alone and unforgiven. But life, he was learning, was not about deserving. It was about choosing, about deciding to build something good even when the world said it was impossible, about loving despite fear and pain and all the very good reasons not to. He thought about the morning he had heard screaming in the forest and made the choice to intervene. That choice had led to this moment, to this family, to this life that was richer and fuller than anything he could have imagined. He had saved 5 orc women from mercenaries, and in doing so, they had saved him from a half-life of isolation and penance. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching as Kara played in the yard with Mara, now a toddler with an endless curiosity, and her mother's stubborn determination. Greta was at her forge, hammering out a new set of hinges. Nessa was returning from a scouting expedition with fresh game. Asha was in the garden, harvesting herbs. Lyra, now a young woman, was teaching some of the village children how to identify edible plants. The life they had built together in Northhaven was not perfect. There were hard days and disagreements and challenges that seemed insurmountable. But it was real and it was theirs, and it was more than enough. Elder Mara stopped by that evening, as she often did, to check on the family that had become something of a symbol for what Northhaven represented. "You have done well," she told Marcus and Kara. "Your family is proof that our different peoples can not only coexist but thrive together." "We are just living our lives," Kara said modestly. "That is exactly the point," Elder Mara said. "You are simply living and loving and raising your child, and that is revolutionary in its own way." After she left, Marcus pulled Kara close and kissed the top of her head. "She is right, you know, about all of it." "I know," Kara said. "But I prefer to think of it as us being stubborn and refusing to let the world tell us what we can and cannot do." Marcus laughed. "That too." As the sun set over Northhaven, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The frontier veteran who had lived alone for years, who had thought he deserved nothing but solitude and punishment, had found something he never expected. He had found love and family and purpose, and he had found it by making the simple choice to do the right thing when it mattered most. He had freed 5 orc women from captivity, and they had freed him from the prison of his own past. Together, they had built a life that defied expectations, and proved that hope and love could flourish even in the hardest soil. And as he watched his daughter laugh in her mother's arms, surrounded by the extended family that had grown from that one crucial choice in a forest clearing, Marcus knew that every step of the difficult journey had been worth it. The story of the frontier veteran and the 5 orc women he saved became part of Northhaven's lore, told around fires on cold nights as an example of courage and compassion. But for Marcus and Kara and their family, it was not a story. It was simply their life, lived one day at a time, full of ordinary joys and challenges, and that was the best ending either of them could have asked for. Years continued to pass in Northhaven, and Marcus watched as his family grew and changed. Mara grew from a toddler into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and had her mother's warrior spirit combined with her father's thoughtfulness. A second child came, a son they named Thomas, who had his father's human features but his mother's strength and resilience. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and Marcus found himself grateful every day for the community that had welcomed them and allowed them to live openly and without fear. Greta eventually married an orc man from the settlement, a carpenter named Drac who matched her boisterous energy and terrible sense of humor. Their wedding was a joyful celebration that brought the entire settlement together. Nesser remained happily single, dedicating herself to exploring and mapping the vast wilderness around Northhaven, though she always came home to the family that had saved her. Asha became the head healer for the settlement, training apprentices and saving countless lives with her skill and knowledge. Lyra fell in love with a human scholar, who had come north to escape persecution for his mixed heritage sympathies. And they built a life together, teaching the settlement's children. On Marcus's 50th birthday, the family gathered for a celebration at the cabin that had become the heart of their extended clan. 3 generations sat around the large table that Marcus had built with his own hands, eating food they had grown and hunted together, laughing and telling stories and simply being together. Mara, now a young woman training to be a warrior like her mother, raised a cup in toast. To my father, who chose compassion over indifference, who built a family from strangers, and who taught me that love is stronger than hate. To Marcus, the family echoed, and he felt his eyes grow hot with emotion. I did not do it alone, he said when he could speak. Every good thing in my life came from the people in this room. You are my purpose, my joy, my redemption. Kara reached over and took his hand, her grip strong and sure after all these years. We found each other when we both needed finding, she said. And we built something that will outlast us both. Marcus looked around the table at the family he had never expected to have, at the life he had never thought he deserved, and felt a completeness that made all the struggles and sacrifices worthwhile. The frontier veteran who had lived alone for years had become a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a pillar of a community that proved every day that different peoples could not only coexist but flourish together. The mercenaries who had captured those 5 orc women in a forest clearing so many years ago could never have imagined the consequences of their cruelty. They could not have known that their actions would lead to the creation of a family that would change the lives of everyone it touched, that would become a living example of hope and possibility, that would prove that the simplest act of doing the right thing could ripple out in ways both profound and beautiful. As the celebration continued into the night, with music and laughter filling the cabin, Marcus stepped outside for a moment to look up at the stars. He thought about the man he had been when he first came to the frontier, hollow and haunted, seeking isolation as penance. He thought about the morning he had heard screaming and chosen to run toward it instead of away. He thought about every choice and chance that had led to this moment, to this family, to this life. Thank you, he whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had guided him to that clearing on that specific morning. Then he went back inside to his family, to the warmth and light and love that had become his entire world, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story of Marcus Thorne and Kara and their family did not end that night, of course. Stories never really end as long as the people in them keep living and loving and building futures. But if this tale has an ending, it is this: that a scarred veteran learned to love again, that 5 orc women found safety and family, that children were born who proved that hope could triumph over hate, and that a small settlement in the far north became a beacon for everyone who believed that different peoples could find common ground. It was not a perfect ending, because real life never is. But it was a happy one and a true one, and that was more than enough.